Good evening, everybody. It's a big week for President Trump, who is in New York City meeting with world leaders for the 72nd United Nations General Assembly. The annual summit trying to tackle a number of international challenges, chief among them North Korea's nuclear threat, Iran's nuclear deal, and Syria's civil war. This is also the president's debut at the United Nations, an organization that he criticized throughout his campaign for the presidency as weak, incompetent, and hardly a friend to democracy. Mr. Trump wasn't wrong, but now he's our president and was much more measured in his criticism today, calling instead for changing business as usual at the UN. Fox News Chief White House correspondent John Roberts with our report.
Lou, good evening. During the campaign and as president, President Trump has promoted an America First policy. But he is making clear here at the United Nations General Assembly, America First does not mean America alone. President Trump was determined to have a good first day at his first UN General Assembly, taking no chances. His first bilaterals with familiar faces, Emmanuel Macron of France and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
I want to say that under President Trump, America's position towards Israel at the UN has been unequivocal, it's been strong, it's got both clarity and conviction.
Netanyahu's effusive praise of the president on 3 occasions now has mostly laid to rest questions about how strong an ally the president would be toward Israel. President Trump repeating today his commitment to finally see peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
I really think we have a chance. I think Israel would like to see it, and I think the Palestinians would like to see it. And I can tell you that the Trump administration would like to see it. So we're working very hard on it. We'll see what happens. Historically, people say it can't happen. I say it can happen.
The bilateral with French President Macron was more like a meeting of old friends. Macron expressing how much he appreciated President Trump attending Bastille Day celebrations back in July.
Our people in France were very proud to have you and your wife, Melania, in Paris.
President Trump today revealing he was so impressed with what he saw during France's military parade that he wants to have something similar here.
So we're actually thinking about 4th of July, Pennsylvania Avenue, having a really great parade to show our military strength.
President Trump also appeared to find a friendly audience at his first official UN event, a meeting to discuss reform of the 72-year-old organization. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley revealing attendance was so high they had to move the gathering.
We had to get a bigger room to accommodate everyone here today.
During the campaign, the president was critical of the UN, tweeting that while it has, quote, such great potential, right now it's just a club for people to get together, talk, and have a good time. So sad. This morning, President Trump was less strident in his language, but no less forceful in his call to change the culture at the UN.
We encourage the Secretary General to fully use his authority to cut through the bureaucracy, reform outdated systems, and make firm decisions to advance the UN's core mission.
The president appears to have an eager partner in his drive for reform, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres joining the call for the UN to focus less on process, more on people and results.
Someone recently asked what keeps me up at night, and my answer was simple: bureaucracy.
Guterres promised a reform UN would give the world more value for its money. On that front, President Trump had a similar message for the 193 member states as he had earlier this year for NATO nations.
We must ensure that no one and no member state shoulders a disproportionate share of the burden, and that's militarily or financially.
Tomorrow morning, the president will give his very first address to the UN General Assembly. That's at 10:30. Terrorism, North Korea, and Iran will all be at the top of his agenda. As UN Ambassador Nikki Haley put it, the president will slap the right people and hug the right people. Lou?
John Roberts, thank you very much. President Trump today also pointing to the bureaucracy and mismanagement at the United Nations, saying results are not in line with the U.S. investment in the institution. President Trump isn't pleased that the United States remains the biggest contributor to the funding of the UN, providing nearly 30% of the peacekeeping budget this year, more than $2 billion out of the total $7.3 billion budget. My first guest tonight says it's time for European allies to pick up the slack and do a lot more. Joining us now, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Fox News contributor, John Bolton. John, great to have you here.
Glad to be here.
This is hardly a new thing. I love Guterres talking about what keeps him up at night is what he knew was there waiting for him when he took on the assignment as Secretary General.
Like all good
bureaucracy.
Like all good Portuguese socialists do.
That's an excellent point. What is the game here? This is an institution that is corrupt to its core. It is absolutely it is owned and operated by third world nations, most of which are either socialistic, communistic, or utterly a dictatorship. And we are watching a Security Council that is frozen by the presence of China and Russia as permanent members with a veto.
Well, I mean, other than that, really, what could go wrong? I mean,
Exactly.
this is the president's a very optimistic man, and so he comes into this particular swamp in the sort of the New York suburb swamp of the Washington swamp and wants to do something about it. I wish him good luck. But I've seen these efforts at quote-unquote reform come and go over the last 30-plus years, and I think this one will probably go in the same direction. There's only one change that can make the UN more responsive, and that's to eliminate this system of mandatory contributions, sometimes called assessed contributions, and make all contributions voluntary so that the agencies actually have to perform to get their money. How's that for a revolutionary thought?
I can just see the metrics by which the United Nations will be judged. How many peace processes have resulted in peace? How many peacekeeping adventures have resulted in peace kept?
Now, look, this is an important point because the effect of deploying UN peacekeeping missions has historically been to freeze the conflict and perpetuate it. We started out, for example, in 1992 to have a referendum on the future of the Western Sahara. This is one of the great crises of the modern
times.
And we needed to have a referendum, the total electorate for which was 70,000 people. That was 26 years ago. That referendum has still not taken place, and that peacekeeping force is still out there. So what we need to do is be able to apply our money to the things we think are important. Other nations can do the same. We may not contribute anywhere near 22%. Europeans like all these activities. Let them pay for them. How about that?
We can't get those European nations to pay their fair share in NATO, which is created specifically to preserve them, to assure their survival, and they won't even pay up. Now, to go to the United Nations and ask for some sort of equity and fairness in contribution, this is what drives me nuts about the United Nations? It's a joke.
Yeah,
it's a failure.
And the Europeans
know, in it at all?
The Europeans know that if the United States unilaterally started making its contributions at the level it wanted to, domestic pressure on their countries to do exactly the same would be unbelievably high. A German diplomat once said to me, when I said, why don't you just decide on your own how much to contribute? He said, we have to be told how much to contribute.
Yes. Well, meanwhile, we pony up the money. I mean, it's really preposterous. Do you think this institution, why in the world do we perpetuate it? It's a joke. Well, and everybody knows it's a joke. And the pretense that somehow great geopolitical minds come together as either leaders of nations or other institutions and then make the world a safer place. It is palpably a lie.
Well, the political institutions have failed. Jeane Kirkpatrick was once asked if the U.S. should withdraw from the UN. She paused for a moment and said, no, it's not worth the trouble. And the reason for that is we'd have to overcome the Europeans. So my suggestion is...
Well, it'd save us a couple of billion a year.
We move to voluntary financing. If that doesn't get their attention and make the reforms, then you withdraw.
Yeah, I just do not comprehend why this fiction is preserved. The president tomorrow will give an important speech, we're told. I have never seen an important speech by a president to the General Assembly.
Well, it's worth a try, I think, so we'll see what the president does. You know, George W. Bush, when he came up here each year, used to refer to it as his annual trip to the Wax Museum. So we'll see if President Trump has better luck.
Well, we will wish him all of the very best in doing so. All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador John Bolton. Breaking news now. The FBI wiretapped former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort before and after last year's presidential election. Unnamed sources telling CNN that the intelligence collected under secret court orders reportedly sparked concerns among investigators that Manafort had some sort of relationship with the Russians, and that, they say, was the basis. What is unclear is whether President Trump, then candidate Trump, during part of the investigation, was wiretapped as well. This is an extraordinary story, an outrageous story. In fact, the FBI investigating and wiretapping the chairman of a presidential campaign, much to follow. A few thoughts tonight on a state government out of control, intent on defying President Trump as it ignores its own citizens. California's Democratic-dominated Senate and Assembly have passed a bill declaring California to be a sanctuary state. Democratic Governor Jerry Brown says he's going to sign it. And the bill bars police from asking about a person's immigration status, prohibits law enforcement from notifying Immigration and Customs Enforcement when certain criminal illegal immigrants are released from jail. But that's not the only step California lawmakers took to defy the Trump administration. Lawmakers allocating $30 million to help dreamers stay in this country, to attend college, $45 million for illegal immigrants in California to hire attorneys to fight deportation. And the legislature also passed a measure calling on Congress to censure President Trump over his Charlottesville response. What does that have to do with anything? It is, after all, California. They didn't mention Antifa, the left-wing violent arm of the left, at all. And also, bills protecting climate data from federal censorship and blocking presidential candidates from appearing on the California ballot in 2020 unless they release 5 years of tax returns. And the movement for the state to secede from the union is making this a third run, which has already failed twice this year. California is simply, in summation, a mess, and it's not likely to get any better at all. Meanwhile, we pony up the money. I mean, it's really preposterous. Do you think this institution, why in the world do we perpetuate it? It's a joke. Well, and everybody knows it's a joke, and the pretense that somehow great geopolitical minds come together as either leaders of nations or other institutions and then make the world a safer place. It is palpably a lie.
Well, the political institutions have failed. Jeane Kirkpatrick was once asked if the U.S. should withdraw from the UN. She paused for a moment and said, no, it's not worth the trouble. And the reason for that is we'd have to overcome the Europeans. So my suggestion is...
Well, it'd save us a couple of billion a year.
We move to voluntary financing. If that doesn't get their attention and make the reforms, then you withdraw.
Yeah, I just do not comprehend why this fiction is preserved. The president tomorrow will give an important speech, we're told. I have never seen an important speech by a president to the General Assembly.
Well, it's worth a try, I think, so we'll see what the president does. You know, George W. Bush, when he came up here each year, used to refer to it as his annual trip to the Wax Museum. So we'll see if President Trump has better luck.
Well, we will wish him all of the very best in doing so. All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador John.